Hello, you tired little peeps. It's that time once again. So let's snuggle up fast, because tonight we're traveling back in time to walk through the silent temples and sacred groves where the ancient Romans whispered their prayers to the gods of hearth and empire. So if you are new to the channel or returning, liking the video significantly helps. Also, please let me know where you're listening in from and what time it is for you. Now get comfortable and let's begin. To understand the religious life of a Roman, we must first quiet our minds and step away from the noise of the modern world. We must strip away our modern understanding of religion as a matter of faith or dogma, and instead visualize a world where the sacred and the mundane are woven together so tightly that they cannot be separated. In the ancient city, under the warm Mediterranean sun, there is no distinction between church and state, or between the spiritual and the secular. There is only the rhythm of the ritual, the precision of the gesture, and the quiet contract between the mortal and the divine. Imagine the early morning light filtering through the compluvium, the square opening in the roof of a Roman atrium. The house is still quiet. The bustling noise of the street, the carts and the merchants has not yet fully awakened. In this silence, the stone floor is cool underfoot. The air holds a stillness that feels heavy and old. Before any business is conducted, before any bread is broken, there is a duty to be performed. This is not a duty of grand gestures or loud proclamations. It is a small, quiet moment that happens in every household, from the humblest apartment in an insula to the grandest villa on the Palatine Hill. The head of the household, the paterfamilias, approaches a small niche in the wall. This is the lararium. It looks like a miniature temple, perhaps made of stucco or painted plaster, with tiny columns and a small pediment. Inside this small shrine, there are small statuettes made of bronze or perhaps just simple clay. They stand silently, watching over the house as they have done for generations. These are the lars, the guardian spirits of the family's prosperity, and the penates, the protectors of the pantry and the household stores. There is a sense of immense calm in observing this ritual. The paterfamilias does not rush. He takes a pinch of incense from a small box. He drops it onto the burning coals in a small brazier. The smoke rises in a thin gray line, twisting slowly in the still air of the atrium. It has a distinct resinous smell, frankincense or myrrh, mixed with the scent of burnt herbs. He watches the smoke ascend. This is the primary act of connection. The smoke carries the message from the earth to the heavens. He might place a small cake made of spelt and salt onto the altar. This is the mola salsa. It is dry and simple. There is no need for extravagance here. The gods of the household do not demand gold. They demand memory and respect. He might pour a small libation of wine, tilting the small bowl just enough so that the dark liquid flows over the edge and onto the altar. The movement is precise. It has been practiced thousands of times. It is a muscle memory of devotion. He murmurs a prayer. The words are formulaic. They are old words, archaic even to him. He speaks them softly, barely above a whisper. He asks for the protection of the house, for the health of the family, and for the preservation of the food stores. But he does not ask for miracles. He asks for stability. He asks for things to remain as they are. This is the essence of Roman piety, the maintenance of the status quo, the keeping of the peace with the invisible forces that inhabit the world. This concept is known as the pax deorum, the peace of the gods. It is a harmonious state that must be maintained through right action. If the rituals are performed correctly, If the words are spoken without error, if the offerings are made at the right time, then the gods remain calm. They remain benevolent. The universe continues to spin on its axis in an orderly fashion. There is a great comfort in this idea. It suggests that the world is not chaotic or random, but that it can be managed through careful, repetitive action. It suggests that we have a role to play in the stability of the cosmos simply by doing our daily chores with reverence. Let us linger for a moment on the figures in the lararium. The lares are often depicted as young men, dancing and holding drinking horns. They are lively spirits, yet they are bound to the physical location of the house. They are the spirits of the place itself. If the family moves, the lares stay. They are in the very stones of the walls, in the threshold of the door, in the hearth where the fire burns. They are the silent witnesses to every meal, every argument, every birth, and every death that happens within those walls. The peanuts are different. They belong to the family line. If the family moves, the peanuts travel with them. They are the continuity of the lineage. When Aeneas fled the burning city of Troy, in the great founding myth of Rome, he carried his father on his back and the penates in his hands. He did not carry gold or weapons. He carried the household gods. This tells us everything we need to know about what mattered most to the Roman mind. Home was not just a building. It was a collection of sacred obligations carried in the hands. As the incense burns down and the prayer concludes, the household begins to stir. But the presence of the divine does not fade. It merely shifts. As the Roman steps out of his front door, he crosses the threshold. This, too, is a sacred boundary. The door is watched over by the god Janus. Janus is the two-faced god, looking both forward and backward, looking into the house and out into the street. He is the god of beginnings, of transitions, of doorways and gates. Every time a door is opened or closed, it is an act that falls under his domain. There is a superstition, a quiet habit, of stepping over the threshold with the right foot first. To lead with the left foot would be unlucky. It would be a disruption of the order. And so, the Roman walks with intention. Even the act of walking is governed by a subtle awareness of the unseen. Walking down the narrow, paved streets of the city, the presence of the gods is unavoidable. On the street corners where two roads meet, there are neighborhood shrines. These are the shrines of the lares compitales, the spirits of the crossroads. Here, the neighbors might gather once a year for a festival, hanging wool dolls on the shrine to represent the members of their households. But on a normal day, they are just quiet markers of the sacred geography of the city. A passerby might nod to the shrine or touch it briefly, acknowledging the local spirits before continuing on their way. The city itself is a vast network of these sacred nodes. It is not just a collection of brick and marble. It is a landscape of memory and divinity. Every spring, every grove of trees, every peculiar rock formation might have a genius, a presiding spirit. The Roman walks through a world that is crowded with invisible inhabitants. To live in Rome is to be never truly alone. As we move deeper into the city, towards the bustling forums and the grand public spaces, the scale of the religion changes, but the fundamental nature does not. The domestic cult of the house is mirrored by the state cult of the empire. The city of Rome is, in a sense, one giant household, and the priests are the stewards who ensure that the Pax Deorum is maintained for the entire population. Let us imagine walking towards the Forum Romanum. The noise increases here. There is the sound of sandals on stone, the murmur of conversation, the distant creak of wagons. But rising above the noise are the temples. They are solid, heavy, and imposing. They are the homes of the great gods, Jupiter, Juno, Minerva, Mars. Unlike modern places of worship, where the congregation gathers inside, the Roman temple is a house for the god, not for the people. The statue of the deity lives inside the cella, the inner sanctuary. The people remain outside. The altar stands in front of the temple, in the open air. This is where the work happens. This is where the smoke rises to the sky. It is a very practical arrangement. The god watches from the doorway of their house while the humans conduct their business in the courtyard. Let us observe a state ritual taking place. It is a slow, methodical process. A procession arrives. The priests, the pontiffs, are dressed in heavy woolen togas. The togas are white, with a purple border for the high magistrates. They pull a fold of the toga over their heads. This is capite velato, with the head covered. This is done not to hide from the god, but to shield the eyes and ears from any ill omens, a distraction, a stray noise, a sight that might invalidate the ritual. The priest stands before the altar. Silence is called for. Favete linguis. Favor us with your tongues, which ironically means to be quiet, to hold your tongue so that no unlucky word is spoken. The crowd quiets down. The atmosphere becomes heavy with expectation. The focus is entirely on the precision of the words. The priest reads from a scroll or repeats a formula whispered to him by an attendant. He must not stumble. He must not stutter. If he makes a mistake, even a slight mispronunciation, the entire ritual is flawed. It must be stopped. It must be started again from the very beginning. This obsessive attention to detail creates a hypnotic rhythm. The repetition of the words, the slow movements of the hands, the careful pouring of the wine, the precise cutting of the sacrificial animal, it is all a performance of order. It is a way of imposing structure on a chaotic world. The animal, perhaps a white ox for Jupiter, stands calmly. It has been chosen for its perfection. Its horns are gilded with gold. Ribbons are tied to its tail. It must not struggle. If it fights, it is a bad omen. So the attendants stroke its neck, keeping it calm, keeping the atmosphere serene. The beast is sprinkled with the mola salsa, the salted flour prepared by the Vestal virgins. It bows its head, interpreting the weight of the flour as a nod of consent. This is not a scene of frenzy. It is a scene of administrative theology. It is a transaction. The Romans were a legalistic people, and their religion reflects this. They have a contract with the gods. I give so that you may give. Duat des. We give you this offering, this respect, this perfect ritual, and in return, you give us safety, victory, and a good harvest. It is rational. It is logical. It is calm. The smoke from the state sacrifice joins the smoke from the thousands of household shrines, creating a haze that hangs over the city. It is a physical manifestation of the connection between Rome and the heavens. The smell of burning wood and incense is the smell of the city itself. But religion in Rome is not just about these grand moments. It is also about the passage of time. The calendar is a religious document. The days are divided into phas and nephas, days when business can be conducted and days when it cannot. The flow of time is regulated by the festivals, the feast days, the anniversaries of temple dedications. To live in Rome is to live in a cycle of eternal return. The same festivals happen at the same time, every year. The Lupercalia in February, the Saturnalia in December, the Vestalia in June. These are the anchors of the year. They provide a sense of predictability that is deeply soothing. You know what will happen next month. You know what rituals will be performed. You know what you will eat and what songs will be sung. Let us drift away from the busy forum now and move towards a quieter part of the city, perhaps near the river Tiber. The water flows slowly, a murky green-brown, carrying the silt of the mountains down to the sea. The river, too, is a god. Father Tiber. He is an old god, depicted with a beard of dripping weeds, reclining on a bed of river stones. Near the river, we find the round temple of Vesta. This is one of the most sacred places in the entire city. It is small, intimate, and circular. Inside, there is no statue of the goddess. Vesta is the goddess of the hearth fire, and her presence is the fire itself. The fire of Vesta is the hearth of the state. Just as every house has a fire that must not go out, the city has a fire that must burn eternally. If the fire of Vesta were to be extinguished, it would mean that the protection of the gods has been lifted. It would be a disaster. Tending to this fire are the Vestal virgins. They are women chosen as children from the noblest families. They live a life of immense privilege and immense restriction. They are the only women in Rome who can make wills, who can testify in court without a male guardian. They travel in carriages through the streets, and even the highest magistrates must step aside for them. But their lives are defined by the slow, constant duty of the fire. Imagine the interior of the temple. It is warm, illuminated only by the flickering light of the flames. The shadows dance on the curved walls. The air is dry and hot. A Vestal stands near the hearth. She is dressed in white with woolen bands in her hair. She watches the embers. She feeds the fire with dry wood, piece by piece. She does not throw a log on. She places it. It is a silent vigil. The fire crackles softly. It is the heartbeat of Rome. As long as this sound continues, as long as the orange glow persists, the empire is safe. There is something incredibly peaceful about this eternal task. It is the ultimate form of housekeeping. It is the maintenance of the light against the darkness. Outside the temple, the city life continues, but inside, time seems to stand still. The Vestals also have other duties. They prepare the mola salsa used in every public sacrifice. They fetch water from the sacred spring of the nymph Egeria. They carry the water in vessels that cannot be set down on the ground, so they must carry them until the water is used. Every action is a discipline. Every movement is a prayer. As we watch the Vestal tending the fire, we can feel the weight of the centuries. This fire has burned since the days of the kings, before the Republic, before the emperors. It connects the present moment to the deep, mythical past. It is a thread of light running through history. The sun begins to dip lower in the sky, casting long shadows across the 7 hills. The temples turn a golden orange in the late afternoon light. The day's business is winding down. The courts are closing. The markets are emptying. But the religious life of the city does not stop. It merely changes its rhythm. In the gardens and the groves, the evening rituals begin. There are gods for the evening, just as there are gods for the morning. There are prayers to be said at dusk. The transition from light to dark is another boundary, another threshold that must be navigated with care. The Roman world is a world of boundaries, between the house and the street, between the city and the field, between the land of the living and the land of the dead. Religion is the map that tells you how to cross these boundaries safely. It provides the passwords, the gestures, the offerings that allow you to move through the world without giving offense to the unseen powers. It is a heavy cloak to wear, this constant awareness of the divine. But it is also a warm cloak. It protects you. It tells you that you are not insignificant. It tells you that your actions matter. It tells you that you are part of a great, orderly system that stretches from your own hearth to the furthest stars. To fully grasp the texture of this world, we must remember that before Rome was a city of marble and gold, it was a settlement of shepherds and farmers on marshy hills. The religion of Rome never forgot this soil. Beneath the grandeur of the imperial cults and the complex state ceremonies, there remained a stubborn, earthy layer of belief that smelled of plowed fields, wet wool, and harvested grain. It was a religion rooted in the anxieties of agriculture, where the primary concern was not the salvation of the soul, but the germination of the seed. Let us imagine the landscape outside the city walls. The noise of the urban center fades into the drone of cicadas and the rustle of wind through the olive groves. Here, the calendar is dictated not by the Senate, but by the sun and the rain. The farmer walks his land with the same reverence as the priest in the temple. For the farmer, the land is alive. It is not inanimate matter. It is a patchwork of divine wills. Every aspect of the natural world has a voice, a spirit, a will that needs to be appeased. The Romans had a name for this vast, crowded pantheon of functional spirits, the indigitamenta. These were not the great Olympians with their thunderbolts and jealousies. These were the little gods, the functional gods, the gods of the verb and the noun. They had no mythology, no stories, no faces. They existed only in the moment of their action. Think of the sheer specificity of this. There was a god named Vervactor, who was responsible for the first plowing of the fallow land. He existed only for that specific turning of the soil. There was Rhedorator, the god of the second plowing. Imporcitor, the god of making the furrows. Inciter, the god of the sowing. Oberator, the god of the top dressing. Occator, the god of the harrowing. When a Roman farmer went out to work, he was not just farming. He was engaging in a complex diplomatic mission with a dozen different invisible specialists. He had to acknowledge them. If he neglected the god of the harrowing might go wrong. The clods of earth might not break apart. The seed might not take. And so, his work was a constant, low-level mumbled prayer, a quiet acknowledgement of the forces that governed his survival. It creates a sense of a world that is incredibly dense. There is no empty space. Every action is populated. Even in the raising of a child, the indigitamenta were present. There was Vaticanus, who opened the newborn's mouth for its first cry. There was Cunina, the goddess who watched over the cradle. There was Rumina, who watched over breastfeeding. There was Fabulinus, who taught the child its first word. There was Statulinus, who helped the child stand up. It is a comforting thought, in a way, to believe that every struggle, every small milestone in life, has a divine assistant assigned to it. You are never struggling alone to plow a field or to teach a child to walk. There is a spirit there, pushing the plow with you, holding the child's hand. It makes the mundane sacred. It elevates the boredom of daily chores into a form of liturgy. Let us return to the fields for a moment to witness one of the oldest and most peaceful rituals, the Ambarvalia. This festival takes place in May, when the crops are ripening but are still vulnerable to blight or storm. The word Ambarvalia comes from ambir, to go around, and arvum, field. It is the ritual of beating the bounds. Imagine a small procession moving slowly along the edge of a property. It is a family, perhaps a few neighbors. They are leading 3 animals, a pig, a sheep, and a bull. This grouping is called the Suovitorilia. The animals are garlanded with flowers. They walk slowly, grazing occasionally as they go. The humans walk behind them, carrying olive branches. They are tracing a magic circle around the farm. They walk the perimeter, defining what is inside and what is outside. Inside is civilization, safety, the cultivated order. Outside is the wild, the chaotic, the unknown. By walking the line, they are strengthening the spiritual walls of the farm. They stop at certain boundary stones, the termini. These stones are sacred to the god Terminus, the god of boundaries. To move a boundary stone is a terrible crime, a sacrilege. It is an insult to the god who holds the map of the world in place. As they walk, they chant a prayer to Mars. Not the Mars of war and blood that we often think of, but Mars, the agricultural guardian, the protector of the fields. They ask him to keep away disease, bad weather, and ruin. They ask him to let the fruits grow high. The chanting is rhythmic, hypnotic. It matches the slow pace of the walking animals. Enos lases juvate. Help us, Laris. The sun beats down on their necks. The dust rises from their sandals. It takes hours to walk the perimeter of a large estate. But there is no rush. The walking is the prayer. The sheer duration of the act is what gives it weight. It is a meditation on ownership, on protection, and on the limits of human control. This obsession with reading the will of the gods extends from the farm to the very sky above. If the earth is crowded with spirits, the sky is a canvas of signs. We must speak of the augurs. The augurs were a college of priests whose sole job was to look at the sky and interpret what they saw. They were the state's official bird watchers. This was not a casual activity. It was a rigorous, technical discipline. Before any major public act could take place, a battle, an election, a meeting of the assembly, the auspices had to be taken. The word auspices comes from aves, birds, and spicere, to look, looking at birds. Imagine an augur preparing for his duty. It is just before dawn. The city is at its quietest. He climbs to the citadel on the Capitoline Hill. He wears a special robe, the trebia, woven with crimson and purple stripes. In his hand, he carries the lituus, a strange, spiral-headed staff that looks like a shepherd's crook without the hook. He sits on a stone seat, facing south. The air is cold and crisp. He breathes slowly. His task requires absolute concentration. He lifts his staff and marks out a section of the sky. He draws an imaginary rectangle in the air. This framed space is called the templum. It is a template, a consecrated viewing screen cut out of the infinite heavens. Whatever happens inside this rectangle is a message. Whatever happens outside it is irrelevant. He waits. He watches the empty blue square. He is looking for birds, but not just any birds. He is looking for specific types: eagles, vultures, crows, ravens, owls. He notes their flight path. Did the bird fly from left to right, or right to left? Did it fly alone or in a flock? Did it make a sound? A crow cawing on the left might be a good sign. A raven croaking on the right might be bad. An eagle soaring high is almost always a sign of Jupiter's favor. The augur does not guess. He consults complex books of interpretation. He is a lawyer of the sky. He interprets the celestial statutes. The silence is crucial. If a mouse squeaks, if a chair creaks, if someone sneezes nearby, the auspices are vitiated. They are spoiled. The connection is broken. The ritual must stop. This demand for silence, for silentium, is a demand for a complete halt to the chaotic noise of human life, so that the subtle language of the universe can be heard. There is a profound stillness in this image. A man sitting motionless on a hill, watching a square of empty sky, waiting for the flap of a wing. It suggests a civilization that is deeply attentive. They are listening. They are watching. They believe that the universe is constantly trying to communicate with them, if only they have the patience to decode the signal. Sometimes, the signs were sought closer to the ground. When the Roman armies were on the march, they could not always find a high hill or wait for eagles. So, they brought the auspices with them in a cage. These were the sacred chickens. It sounds almost comical to modern ears, but it was deadly serious to the Romans. The Polarius, the keeper of the chickens, would open the cage before a battle. He would throw down some grain. If the chickens rushed out and ate greedily, so greedily that bits of grain fell from their beaks and hit the ground, this was a tripudium. It was a favorable omen. The gods were hungry. The gods were with them. The army could march. If the chickens refused to eat, if they huddled in the corner of the cage or tried to fly away, it was a disaster. The battle had to be postponed. The gods were not ready. There is a story of a Roman admiral, Publius Claudius Pulcher, who during the First Punic War wanted to engage the Carthaginian fleet. The chickens were brought out. They refused to eat. Pulcher, arrogant and impatient, lost his temper. He shouted, "If they will not eat, let them drink." And he threw the sacred chickens into the sea. He sailed into battle. He was catastrophically defeated. To the Roman mind, he didn't lose because of bad tactics or poor wind. He lost because he broke the connection. He ignored the data. He disrespected the quiet mechanism of the universe. The chickens were just the needle on the gauge. Throwing the gauge into the ocean doesn't change the pressure in the tank. These rituals, whether looking at birds or feeding chickens, were a way of sharing the burden of decision-making. The weight of the world is heavy. A general, a consul, a father. They all have to make choices that affect lives. By consulting the auspices, they were stepping back. They were admitting that they did not know everything. They were asking for a second opinion from the silence. And there were other silences to be found in the Roman landscape. Scattered throughout the city and the countryside were the Luci, singular, Lucus. These were the sacred groves. A lucus was not just a clump of trees. It was a clearing in the forest where the light struck the ground in a particular way, or a grove of ancient oaks that had never felt the bite of an axe. Entering a sacred grove was different from entering a temple. A temple was man-made, geometric, precise. A grove was wild, organic, shadowy. The trees themselves were the pillars. The canopy of leaves was the roof. The air in a lucus was often described as holding a horror, not horror in the modern sense of fear, but a trembling awe, a physical reaction to the presence of something ancient and non-human. The poet Lucan describes such a grove. A grove there was, untouched by men's hands from ancient times, whose interlacing boughs enclosed a space of darkness and cold shade, and banished the sunlight from above. In these places, the wind seemed to speak. The rustling of the leaves was an oracle. Offerings were hung from the branches, garlands of wool, small tablets with prayers written on them. You walked softly here. You did not break a branch. You did not harvest the wood. To cut down a tree in a sacred grove was an act that required immense expiation, huge sacrifices to apologize to the spirits who lived in the bark and the sap. The Romans, for all their engineering and their road building and their desire to conquer nature, maintained these pockets of untouchable wilderness. They recognized that some places simply belonged to the gods. These groves were the lungs of the spiritual world, places where the strict order of the city, dissolved into the soft, shadowy chaos of the divine nature. Imagine sitting in such a grove. The city is miles away. The only sound is the wind moving through the canopy of a 1,000-year-old oak. The light is dappled, shifting on the forest floor. There is a smell of pine needles and damp earth. It is a place of deep, restorative rest, a place where the human ego shrinks and the timeless life of the forest takes over. This connection to the earth and the sky, to the birds and the trees, provided a constant, low-frequency hum of spirituality that ran beneath the entire Roman civilization. It was not a religion of excitement. It was a religion of observation. It required you to slow down, to look, to listen, to wait. As we move from the natural world back towards the structures of human society, we find that this need for order and observation permeates the calendar itself. Time in Rome was not an empty container to be filled. It was a landscape to be navigated. And the guides for this navigation were the priests who understood the quality of time. To the Roman mind, time was not a straight line stretching from the past into the future. It was a circle. It was a wheel that turned slowly, bringing the same obligations, the same fears, and the same celebrations back around, year after year. This circular nature of time is best observed in the Fasti, the Roman calendar. Imagine standing before a great wall in a public square. On the white marble, columns of letters are carved and painted in red and black. This is the map of the year. It is a dense grid of information. Every day is marked with a letter denoting its legal and religious status. There is an F for dies fasti, days when civil business can be conducted. There is an N for dies nefasti, days when the courts must close and no political assemblies can meet because the day belongs to the gods. There is NP, days of public festivals, holidays where the city stops to breathe. Reading the calendar is like reading a musical score. It dictates the rhythm of the city. It tells the population when to work and when to rest, when to speak and when to be silent. It creates a shared temporal reality. Everyone in the empire, from the drizzly coast of Britannia to the burning sands of Syria, is living within this same grid of sacred time. One of the most soothing aspects of this calendar is the nundinae. This is the market cycle. The Romans did not have a 7-day week. They had an 8-day cycle, 7 days of work, followed by the 8th day, the nundinae. On this day, the farmers from the countryside would load their carts and walk slowly into the city. The city, usually so bureaucratic and rigid, would soften on these days. It was a time for visiting, for buying salted fish and fresh cheese, for catching up on news. The schools were closed. The courts were suspended. It was a recurring, dependable pause. For hundreds of years, every 8th day, the heartbeat of the empire slowed down just a little bit. There is a deep comfort in that predictability. No matter how hard the work week was, the nundinae was always coming. Within this cycle lay the great festivals, the anchors of the year. But let us look past the noisy, drunken revelry of the famous Saturnalia. Let us look instead at the quieter, stranger, more obscure rituals that filled the Roman year. These are the ones that truly reveal the Roman soul. Consider the Arval Brethren, the Fratres Arvalis. This was a college of 12 priests, perhaps the oldest and most aristocratic priesthood in Rome. Their name means brothers of the fields. Their entire existence was dedicated to a goddess so old and obscure that her name was simply Dea Dia, the goddess, or the bright goddess. Their rituals were the epitome of archaic, repetitive boredom. In May, they would gather in a sacred grove of laurel and oak trees outside the city, at the 5th milestone on the Via Campana. They would stay there for 3 days. They would wear wreaths of grain sheaves tied with white ribbons. Inside their temple, the doors were sealed shut. The world was locked out. Inside, the priests would perform a dance. It was not a wild dance. It was a slow, 3-step rhythm. As they danced, they chanted a song, the Carmen Arval. The words of this song were so old that by the time of the emperors, even the priests themselves didn't really know what they meant. They were chanting in a dead dialect of Latin, sounds that had been preserved like insects in amber. Enos lases juvat, enos lases juvat, enos lases juvat. Help us, Lares, they sang it 3 times. Neve lu ru marmar sins incurrere in pleoris. And do not let the plague, O Mars, fall upon the many. They sang it 3 times. They had books to help them pronounce the syllables. They passed the jars of boiled porridge from hand to hand. This is the definition of conservative religion. It didn't matter if you understood the words. What mattered was that you said them. You preserved the sound. You kept the chain unbroken. For centuries, while emperors rose and fell, while wars were won and lost, these 12 men met in a quiet grove to eat porridge and chant nonsense words to a forgotten goddess, just to keep the fields fertile. It is a level of dedication to the mundane that is almost hypnotic. Let us move from the fields in May to the silence of a Roman home in May for the festival of the Lemuria. This was the festival of the restless dead, the lemures. Unlike the friendly ancestors, the Lares, these were spirits who had not found peace. They were hungry, wandering ghosts. The ritual to appease them was not a public spectacle. It was a private, domestic act performed in the dead of night. It is a scene of perfect, eerie stillness. It is midnight. The house is dark. The family is asleep. Only the paterfamilias, the father, is awake. He rises from his bed. He must be barefoot. His feet touch the cold stone floor. This contact with the earth is essential. He makes a sign with his hand, the mano fica, placing the thumb between the closed fingers. This is a gesture of protection, a lock against evil. He walks to a spring or a basin and washes his hands in pure water. Cleanliness is godliness here. Then he takes a handful of black beans. Black beans are the food of the dead. He puts the beans in his mouth. He begins to walk through the house. He does not look back. To look back would be to break the spell, to acknowledge the ghosts directly. He spits the beans out of his mouth, one by one, onto the floor behind him. As he spits them, he says, "With these beans, I redeem myself and my family." He imagines the unseen spirits following him, picking up the beans, distracted by the offering. He repeats this 9 times. 9 is a magical number, a number of completion. After the beans are gone, he washes his hands again. He clashes bronze vessels together, perhaps banging 2 pots or ringing a bell. The sharp metallic sound cuts through the heavy silence of the house. He shouts, "Ghosts of my fathers, be gone." Manes exit paterni. He says this 9 times. Only then does he look back. The ritual is done. The house is cleansed. The family can sleep safely for another year. The image of the barefoot man walking in the dark, spitting beans for ghosts, is one of the most intimate snapshots we have of Roman fear and Roman comfort. It is a way of tidying up the spiritual atmosphere of the home, just as one might sweep the floor. As the wheel of the year turns, we encounter the Robigalia in April. This is a festival dedicated to Robigus, the god of mildew. Yes, a god of mildew. Specifically, the red rust fungus that attacks wheat. The Romans were so practical that they deified the diseases that threatened their food supply, hoping to negotiate with them. A procession would form in the city. Led by the Flamen Quirinalis, a high priest, they would walk out of the city gates along the Via Claudia. They were all dressed in white to symbolize the purity of the crop. They walked to a specific spot, a sacred grove 5 miles from the city. The walk itself was part of the cure. A long, slow march under the spring sun. When they arrived, the priest would offer a prayer. It is a strange, pleading prayer. "Rough Robigus," he would say, "spare the plants of Ceres. Withhold your rough hands from the crops." He would ask the god to attack weapons instead. "Eat the swords," he would pray. "Eat the iron of war, but leave the wheat alone." It is a beautiful sentiment, a prayer for peace and plenty, asking the destructive power of rust to focus on the tools of violence rather than the tools of life. Then, a sacrifice was made. A reddish-colored dog was sacrificed. The color red represented the rust. By giving the god something red, they hoped he would be satisfied and not take the red wheat. It is sympathetic magic, like cures-like. The smoke would rise, the priest would wipe his hands, and the procession would walk back to the city. The wheat was safe. The anxiety was managed. These festivals were not just about fear, they were about gratitude and the simple pleasure of the seasons. In June, there was the Vestalia, the festival of Vesta, the hearth goddess we met earlier. For a few days, the temple of Vesta, usually closed to all but the virgins and the Pontifex Maximus, was opened to women. Matrons of Rome would walk barefoot to the temple. They carried simple offerings of food. It was a humble festival. The bakers and the millers celebrated too, hanging garlands of flowers around the necks of the donkeys that turned the millstones. Even the donkeys got a day off. The millstones stopped grinding. The city smelled of fresh bread and flowers. It was a celebration of the most basic element of life, bread. The Romans understood that civilization rested on these basics: grain, fire, water, stone. Their religion was a way of honoring the materials of life. Consider the termini, the boundary stones we mentioned before. In February, there was the terminalia. Neighbors from adjacent farms would meet at the boundary stone that separated their lands. They would build a shared altar. Each side would bring a garland to decorate their side of the stone. They would sacrifice a lamb or a piglet, letting the blood run onto the stone. They would share a meal right there, straddling the line. It was a way of saying, "This is mine, and that is yours, and we agree on this." It turned a potential source of conflict, the property line, into a meeting place. It sanctified the border. In a world without GPS or digital surveys, these stones were the anchors of social peace. The god Terminus refused to move, even for Jupiter. He represented the stubborn necessity of limits. The summer passes into autumn. The harvest is brought in. The days grow shorter. The calendar leads us towards December and the winter solstice. The light fails. The world gets cold. And the Romans, like all ancient peoples, felt the need to light fires against the encroaching dark. But before the explosion of the Saturnalia, there were quieter observances. There was the soaking of the stored grain to prevent it from drying out. There was the opening of the mundus. The mundus was a pit, a deep hole in the ground in the Roman Forum. It was covered by a great stone called the lapis manalis. It was said to be the connection to the underworld. 3 times a year, the stone was lifted. The door to the gloomy infernal gods is open, they said. On these days, no battle could be engaged, no ship could set sail. the city held its breath. The lid was off the jar of the underworld. It wasn't a time of panic, but of caution, a time to step lightly. It was a reminder that the solid earth of the Forum, with its marble and its speeches, was built on top of something deep and hollow. The Roman year was a dense tapestry of these moments. There was hardly a week without a dedication, a procession, or a taboo. To the modern observer, it might seem exhausting, but to the Roman, it was likely comforting. It meant that there was a procedure for everything. There was a correct way to prune a vine, a correct way to say goodbye to a dying relative, a correct way to declare war and a correct way to make peace, a correct way to cross a river, a correct way to sneeze. This structure meant that you didn't have to invent your life from scratch. The path was already laid out. The footprints of the ancestors, the mos maiorum, were visible in the dust. All you had to do was step where they had stepped. This reliance on the mos maiorum, the way of the elders, gave Roman life a heavy, conservative gravity. Innovation was generally looked upon with suspicion. New was often synonymous with dangerous. The ideal was not progress, but preservation. The goal was to keep the fire burning, to keep the boundaries clear, to keep the words of the prayers exactly the same as they had been 500 years ago. It is a mindset that lends itself to a deep, abiding quietness. It is the quietness of a library or a museum, where the air is preserved and the temperature is controlled. As we move away from the public calendar, we must look closer at the individuals who maintained this system. We have spoken of the Vestals and the Arval brethren, but there were others. The Flamen the high priest of Jupiter, lived a life so restricted by taboos that he was practically a living statue. His life was a performance art of holiness. He was not allowed to ride a horse. He was not allowed to see an army. He was not allowed to touch a dog or a goat. He could not touch raw meat. He could not touch ivy or beans. He could not have a knot anywhere on his person. No knots in his belt. No knots in his shoelaces. His life had to be free of entanglements, literal and metaphorical. If a prisoner managed to enter his house, the prisoner's chains had to be removed and thrown out through the roof, not the door. If a man bound for a beating fell at his feet, the beating had to be stopped for the day. The Flamen was a walking sanctuary. He belonged to the gods so completely that he ceased to be a normal human being. Even his hair and nail clippings had to be buried under a lucky tree. To live such a life, every minute of every day, required a discipline that is hard for us to imagine. It was a life of total, yielding submission to the ritual. And yet, he was one of the most powerful men in Rome. His presence alone conferred a blessing. This tells us that the Romans valued this kind of disciplined stillness above almost anything else. Having explored the sacred calendar and the priests who walked its grid, we must now turn our gaze inward. We move from the public square and the temple steps into the most intimate spaces of the Roman world, the body, the health, and the transition from life to death. Even here, in the fragility of human existence, the Romans applied their structured, quiet logic. Medicine in Rome was a strange blend of Greek science, practical herbalism, and religious ritual. A sick Roman did not just call a doctor. They entered into a negotiation with the forces of nature. The god of healing, Aesculapius, had a great temple on the Tiber Island, shaped like a ship. To this day, the island still holds a hospital, a continuity of healing that stretches back 2,000 years. Imagine a Roman suffering from a persistent illness. They might travel to this island. They would not be subjected to loud machines or bright lights. Instead, they would undergo a ritual called incubatio, temple sleep. the patient would bathe in sacred waters. They would offer a small cake or incense on the altar. Then, as night fell, they would lie down on a skin of a sacrificed animal, usually a sheep, in the portico of the temple. The air was cool and smelled of the river. The only sound was the lapping of the Tiber against the stone embankment and the soft rustling of the sacred snakes that were allowed to slither freely through the temple grounds. These snakes were not venomous. They were the servants of the god. To feel the dry, cool skin of a snake moving over your leg in the dark was a sign of healing. It was the god touching you. The patient would drift off to sleep, hoping for a dream. In the dream, the god would appear and either cure them instantly or give them instructions. Eat fennel, run 3 laps, drink cold water. The next morning, the patient would wake up and tell their dream to a priest who would interpret the prescription. It was a therapy based on rest, suggestion, and the deep, restorative power of sleep itself. The quiet of the temple, the separation from the stress of the city, the belief in a benevolent power, all of these were potent medicines. For those who could not go to the temple, there were household remedies. Cato the Elder, a stern and traditional Roman, believed that cabbage could cure almost anything. He wrote long, serious instructions on how to use cabbage for digestion, for wounds, for headaches. It cleanses the body, he wrote. There is a quaint, earthy comfort in imagining a Roman senator prescribing boiled cabbage to his household with the same gravity as a state decree. But what of the ultimate transition? Death, for the Romans, was not an end, but a change of status. It was a journey that required careful preparation. The funeral rites were designed to guide the soul safely from the land of the living to the land of the ancestors, the manes. When a Roman died at home, the very first act was the conclamatio. The family would gather around the bed and call the person's name 3 times. It was a final check, a way to ensure they were truly gone, but also a formal goodbye. Veil, veil, veil. Farewell, farewell, farewell. The body was washed and dressed in their finest clothes. A toga for a citizen, perhaps their insignia of office. A small coin was placed in their mouth. This was the fee for Charon, the ferryman who would row them across the river Styx. Even in death, a Roman needed small change. It was a practical detail. You don't want to be stuck on the wrong side of the river because you forgot your wallet. The funeral procession, the pampa, was a public display, but the rituals at the gravesite were solemn and focused on purification. The Romans were terrified of pollution. Death was unclean. It stained the living. So after the body was cremated or buried, the family had to undergo a period of cleansing. They had to step over fire. They had to be sprinkled with water. They had to sweep the house. The dead were not buried in the city. The 12 tables, the ancient law code, forbade it. Let no dead man be buried or burned within the city. So the cemeteries lined the roads leading out of Rome. To walk along the Appian Way was to walk through a city of the dead. Tombs of all sizes lined the road, their inscriptions facing the traveler. These inscriptions speak to us across the centuries. They are often surprisingly conversational. Stranger, stop and read my story, they say. I was not, I was, I am not, I do not care. Non fui, fui, non sum, non curo. This common inscription reflects a stoic acceptance of non-existence. It is calm. It is resigned. Others are more touching. A husband writes to his wife, "She was the wool worker, the keeper of the house. She spun the thread, she kept the faith. Domum servavit, lanam fecit." It reduces a life to its quietest, most essential virtues. The relationship with the dead did not end at the funeral. The dead were needy. They required food and drink. Many tombs were built with a pipe or a hole that went down into the grave. On the festival of the Parentalia in February, the family would go to the tomb and pour wine, milk, or honey down this tube. They were literally feeding the ancestors. They would picnic on the grave, sharing a meal with the unseen members of the family. It suggests a world where the boundary between life and death is porous. The dead are just downstairs or in the next room. They are still part of the family. They still need to be included in the feast. This reverence for the past and for the ancestors anchored the Roman sense of self. A Roman noble did not just have a name, he had a mask. In the atrium of a noble house, there were cupboards containing wax masks of the ancestors. These were realistic death masks, capturing the wrinkles, the scars, the stern expressions of the grandfathers and great-grandfathers. During a funeral, actors would be hired to wear these masks and the robes of office of the ancestors. They would walk in the procession. It was as if the entire family tree had come back to life to welcome the new member. To grow up in a house watched over by these wax faces was to be constantly reminded of your duty. You were never just an individual. You were a link in a chain. You had to live up to the silent expectations of those plaster eyes. Let us shift our focus now from the somber rituals of death to the quiet magic of daily protection. The Roman world was full of small dangers: the evil eye, bad luck, envy. To counter these, the Romans used amulets and charms. A common sight on infants was the bulla. This was a locket, usually made of gold for the rich or leather for the poor, worn around the neck. Inside were tiny protective charms. A boy wore his bulla every day until he became a man. It was his shield against the envious glares of strangers. When he put on the toga virilis, the toga of manhood, he would take off the bulla and dedicate it to the household gods. It was a moment of leaving childhood vulnerability behind. The phallus was another ubiquitous symbol. We see it carved into paving stones, painted on walls, hung as wind chimes, tintinnabulum. To the modern eye, it seems obscene. To the Roman, it was simply good luck. It was a symbol of generative power, of life force, capable of scaring away evil spirits. The tintinnabulum hung in doorways and gardens. When the wind blew, the bells would chime. Ding, ding. The sound itself was protective. It broke the silence that evil spirits preferred. It was a cheerful, functional magic. We also find magic in the deficciones, the curse tablets. These were small sheets of lead inscribed with scratches and prayers, then rolled up and thrown into a well or buried in a grave. They were letters to the underworld. I bind the tongue of Marcus so he cannot speak against me in court. I bind the horses of the green faction so they cannot run. While the intent was often malicious, the method was bureaucratic. They were filing a formal complaint with the infernal powers. They used legal language. They listed the names. They were precise. It was a way of taking control of a situation where one felt powerless. Instead of acting out in rage, the Roman scratched his anger onto soft lead, folded it tight, and gave it to the earth. It was a way of depositing negative emotion into a cold, dark place. Even the water that flowed through the city was sacred. We have spoken of the Tiber, but what of the aqueducts? These triumphs of engineering were also religious conduits. The water arrived from the hills, pure and cold. When it reached the city, it emerged at the fountains. The Fons, the god of the source, was worshipped at the Fontinalia. Wells were decorated with flowers. To pollute a spring was a crime against the god. The Romans understood that water was life. The splash of water in a fountain was the sound of the city's pulse. Imagine sitting by a public fountain in a small piazza. The stone rim is worn smooth by centuries of hands. Women come to fill their jars. The water flows from the mouth of a stone lion. It is a constant, steady stream. It has traveled 30 miles through dark tunnels and over high arches to get here. It is a gift from the mountains to the city. The sound of running water is one of the most ancient tranquilizers. It masks the noise of the carts. It cools the air. It is a piece of wild nature, tamed and brought into the heart of the urban sprawl. Water was also the center of the Roman bath, the thermae. This was a daily ritual for almost everyone. It was not just about getting clean. It was a social and physical reset. The progression through the rooms, from the changing room, apoditerium, to the cold room, frigidarium, to the warm room, tepidarium, to the hot room, caldarium, was a ritual in itself. The tepidarium was a place of supreme relaxation. There were no pools here, just warm air. The walls were heated. You sat on a bench. The gentle heat seeped into your bones. You applied oil to your skin. You scraped it off with a strigil, a curved metal tool. The scrape of the strigil on skin, the murmur of quiet conversation, the echo of the high vaulted ceilings. It was a cathedral of the body. In the baths, the social hierarchy dissolved slightly. A senator and a shopkeeper might sit next to each other, both naked, both sweating. It was a space of shared humanity. The noise of the outside world was muffled by the thick walls. The light came down from high windows, filtering through the steam. It was a hazy, dreamlike environment. After the bath, one might go to the library attached to the complex. To read a scroll in the quiet aftermath of a hot bath is a specific kind of luxury. The body is loose, the mind is clear. The Romans built these massive complexes to manufacture this feeling of well-being on an industrial scale. The connection between physical cleanliness and spiritual purity was strong. You washed before a sacrifice. You washed before a meal. You washed the dead. Water was the great mediator. Let us take a moment to look at the household shrine again, the lararium, but this time in the context of the kitchen. The kitchen was the heart of the house's production. Here, the slaves worked. The fire burned. And here, too, the gods were present. The Lairs watched the cooking pot. If the bread did not rise, if the milk went sour, it was a matter for the gods. Small offerings were thrown into the cooking fire, a piece of meat, a splash of oil. The kitchen gods were not distant Olympians. They were part of the staff. They were treated with familiarity. A slave might talk to the lar while chopping onions. Look after this stew, little one. It made the drudgery of domestic labor feel less lonely. There is a concept in Roman religion called pietas. We translate it as piety, but that is too narrow. Pietas meant duty. Duty to the gods, yes, but also duty to the state, to the family, to the parents. It was a web of obligation that held the world together. A person with pietas was a person who knew their place and fulfilled their role. They were reliable. They were steady. They did not rock the boat. Aeneas was called Pius Aeneas, not because he prayed a lot, but because he carried his father and did what he was told by destiny. This emphasis on duty and reliability creates a society that values the boring virtues: endurance, patience, fidelity. These are not the flashy virtues of a superhero. They are the quiet virtues of a stone wall. They are the skills that allow a civilization to survive for 1,000 years. The Roman took pride in gravitas, seriousness, weight, dignity. To be light, to be flighty, was a flaw. You wanted to be a person of substance. You walked slowly. You spoke deliberately. You did not giggle. You embodied the stability of the state in your own body language. This heaviness, this gravitas, acts as a damper on the chaos of life. It slows things down. It grounds the electricity of emotion. When you visualize a Roman senator, you visualize a statue, still, draped in heavy wool, unmoving. It is an image of profound rest. As we continue to explore this world, we will see how this sense of order extended to the most chaotic of all human endeavors: war. Even in the legion, amidst the clash of steel, there was a quiet, religious heart beating. To understand the Roman army, we must look past the sword and the shield to the spirit that bound the legion together. A Roman legion was not merely a military unit. It was a traveling, religious community. The camp itself was a temple. When the legion marched, they carried their gods on poles. When they stopped, they built a sacred city from the earth. Imagine the end of a long day's march. The sun is setting. Thousands of men stop in the middle of a wilderness, perhaps in the forests of Germania or the deserts of Judea. They do not just throw down their packs and sleep. They perform a ritual of construction. The surveyors, the grammatiki, step forward. They use a tool called a gromabor to sight straight lines. They mark out a perfect square. They mark the 4 gates. They mark the center, the principia. It is an act of imposing geometry on nature. Within hours, a ditch is dug, a rampart is raised, and tents are pitched in exact rows. Every soldier knows exactly where his tent goes. He could find it in the pitch dark. This predictability is a form of psychological armor. No matter where they are in the hostile world, the camp is always Rome. It is always the same. In the center of this camp, in the Principia, stands the shrine of the standards. This is the Holy of Holies. Here, the eagle, the aquila, is kept. The eagle is made of gold or silver, perched on a lightning bolt. It is not just a symbol. It is the physical embodiment of the legion's soul. To lose the eagle is to lose the god. It is the ultimate disgrace. On feast days, the soldiers would anoint the eagle with expensive perfumes and decorate it with garlands of roses. Imagine a rough, battle-scarred centurion carefully applying scented oil to a metal bird. It is a tender act of devotion. The standards were believed to have a will of their own. If the standard was stuck in the mud and couldn't be pulled out when it was time to march, it was a sign. The god wanted to stay. The army would not move. The soldier's life began with a religious act, the sacramentum. This was the military oath. It was more than a pledge of allegiance. It was a curse. The soldier voluntarily agreed to be accursed by the gods if he broke his word. By taking the oath, he transformed from a civilian into a dedicated instrument of the state. He surrendered his body to the will of the emperor. This surrender brought a strange kind of peace. The soldier did not have to decide where to go or who to fight. The decision was made for him. His duty was simply to obey, to stand in line, to keep his kit clean, to dig the trench. There is a meditative quality to the discipline of the legion. The endless drilling, the polishing of armor, the rhythmic marching step. It creates a collective trance, a singular mind made of thousands of bodies. Within the army, specific cults flourished that were distinct from the state religion. The most famous and mysterious of these was the cult of Mithras. Mithraism was a religion of the soldiers, the traders, the bureaucrats. It was an all-male cult, shrouded in total secrecy. We know little about it because they were forbidden to write down their teachings. What we have are the spaces they left behind, the Mithraea, These were small, underground temples designed to look like caves. To enter a Mithraeum, you have to descend. You leave the light of the upper world and go down into the cool, damp earth. Imagine a long, narrow room, windowless and dark. Stone benches line the walls where the initiates would recline for their sacred meal. The ceiling is painted dark blue and covered with stars, mimicking the night sky. At the far end, illuminated by the flickering light of oil lamps, is the central image, the tauroctony. It is a statue or relief carving showing the god Mithras, a young man in a Persian cap, slaying a bull. He looks away as he drives the dagger in, his face sorrowful or detached. A dog and a snake drink the blood. A scorpion attacks the bull. It is a complex astrological code. The bull represents the constellation Taurus. The scorpion is Scorpio. The dog is Canis Major. The killing of the bull is a cosmic event, the turning of the heavens, the releasing of life force. The ceremonies in these caves were intense and intimate. There were 7 grades of initiation, each with its own name and mask: raven, nymph, soldier, lion, Persian, sunrunner, father. As you moved up the ranks, you learned more of the secrets. Imagine the atmosphere during a ritual. The heavy door is closed. The air is thick with incense. The only light comes from the lamps, casting long, dancing shadows on the cave walls. The men share a meal of bread and wine. They call each other brother. In the rigid hierarchy of Rome, this brotherhood was a relief. Inside the cave, a slave could be a father, and a general could be a mere raven. The spiritual rank superseded the social rank. For a soldier stationed on the rainy, cold frontier of Hadrian's Wall, the Mithraeum was a warm womb. It was a place of belonging. It offered a personal salvation, a promise that the soul would ascend through the 7 spheres of the planets after death. It was a religion of the dark, of the star-filled void, of the quiet strength found in brotherhood. But the army also respected the old functional gods. There was the tubilustrium, the purification of the trumpets. The long war trumpets, the tubae, were brought out and cleansed in a special ceremony. These instruments were the voice of the army. They signaled the charge, the retreat, the wake-up call, the sleep call. To purify them was to ensure that the commands were clear and holy. Even the camp walls had a god. The vallum, the rampart, was sacred. To climb over the wall instead of using the gate was a capital offense. It was not just a breach of security. It was a breach of the spiritual barrier that separated the order of the camp from the chaos of the wild. This dichotomy between order and chaos is the fundamental axis of Roman thought. We see it in their obsession with boundaries, but also in their fascination with foreign gods who seemed to break those boundaries. As Rome expanded, it absorbed the gods of the people it conquered. This process is called interpretatio Romana. They would look at a foreign god and say, "Ah, that is just Mercury with a different name," or "That is obviously Juno." But some foreign gods were too strange, too exotic to be simply renamed. They arrived in Rome with their own priests, their own music, and their own peculiar rituals, and Rome, in its hunger for divine insurance, welcomed them too, albeit with a mix of fascination and suspicion. Consider the arrival of Cybele, the Magna Mater, the Great Mother from Asia Minor. She was brought to Rome during a crisis in the war against Hannibal. The Sibylline books, a collection of ancient prophecies, said that the foreign invader could only be driven from Italy if the Great Mother was brought to Rome. So they went to get her. They brought back a black meteorite stone that embodied the goddess. When the ship arrived at the mouth of the Tiber, it got stuck in the mud. No amount of pulling could move it. A noblewoman named Claudia Quinta, whose reputation had been questioned, stepped forward. She prayed to the goddess to vindicate her purity. She took the rope and pulled the ship gently. It moved effortlessly. The goddess had accepted the city. The worship of Cybele was wilder than the staid Roman rituals. Her priests, the Galli, were eunuchs who wore bright yellow robes and banged tambourines. They danced in ecstasy. The Romans allowed this, but they kept it contained. Citizens were originally forbidden from becoming priests of Cybele. They could watch the colorful processions. They could listen to the exotic drums, but they had to remain Roman. Yet, over time, the Great Mother became a fixture of the city. Her temple stood on the Palatine Hill, right next to the houses of the emperors. It is a testament to the Roman ability to integrate the other. They walled in the wildness. They gave it a temple, a festival, a slot in the calendar. They domesticated the ecstasy. Then there was Isis, the Egyptian goddess of 10,000 names. Her cult spread through the ports, carried by sailors and merchants. Isis was a mother, a healer, a magician. Her rituals were beautiful and sensory. Unlike the dark caves of Mithras, the temples of Isis were filled with light and water. The daily opening of the temple was a spectacle. At dawn, the priests, with shaven heads and white linen robes, would throw open the doors of the sanctuary. They would pull back the curtains to reveal the statue of the goddess to the rising sun. They would sprinkle Nile water, or water blessed to be Nile water, on the floor. They would shake the sistrum, a metal rattle that made a soft, jingling sound. Shh, shh, shh. The sound of the sistrum was said to repel evil forces. It was a gentle, rhythmic percussion. The devotees of Isis would stand in the courtyard, greeting the goddess as she woke up. They believed she listened to their sorrows. She was a compassionate goddess, a weeping goddess who had searched the world for the pieces of her husband Osiris. She understood loss. For the Roman woman, or the freedman, or the weary traveler, the face of Isis offered a softness that the stern face of Jupiter lacked. You could cry in front of Isis. You could tell her your secrets. These foreign cults provided an emotional outlet. The state religion was for the safety of the empire. The mystery cults were for the safety of the heart. A Roman could practice both. He could sacrifice a white ox to Jupiter in the morning for the success of his business, and then attend a secret meeting of Isis in the evening to pray for his sick child. There was no conflict. The more gods, the better. The more protection, the thicker the shield. This accumulation of gods meant that the city was crowded with divine real estate. Walking through Rome, you would pass the temple of Vesta, then a shrine to a neighborhood hero, then a temple to the Great Mother, then an altar to the unknown god, set up just in case they forgot someone. There is a story that the Romans, when besieging a foreign city, would perform a ritual called evocatio. They would formally invite the gods of the enemy city to leave and come to Rome. If there is a god or goddess who protects this people, the general would chant, I ask you, I pray to you, to abandon this city and come to Rome. We will give you temples. We will give you games. They were poaching the gods. They believed that if they could convince the divine protection to switch sides, the city would fall. And then, true to their word, they would build a temple for the captured god in Rome. It was a form of spiritual imperialism. Rome became the museum of the world's deities. This openness suggests a deep curiosity and a lack of arrogance about the nature of the divine. The Romans did not claim to have the only truth. They assumed that other people knew things they didn't. Maybe the Gauls knew a god of horses that was better than the Roman one. Maybe the Egyptians knew a secret about the afterlife. Better to bring them all in. Let us return to the quiet of the private sphere, specifically to the world of Roman women and their specific religious landscape. While men dominated the public rites, women had their own festivals, their own goddesses, and their own mysteries. The Bona Dea, the good goddess, was worshipped exclusively by women. Her name was never spoken. Her festival in December was held in the house of a high magistrate, but all the men were ordered to leave. Even the male statues and paintings were covered up. We do not know exactly what happened during these rites because the secret was kept for centuries. We know there was wine, referred to as milk, to avoid the taboo of women drinking, music, and sacrifice. It was a night where the strict patriarchal order was suspended. For one night, the house belonged entirely to women. They were the masters of the sacred space. It was a pressure valve, a necessary release in a society that was so heavily controlled by men. There was also Fortuna Muliebris, the luck of women, and Carmenta, the goddess of childbirth and prophecy, and Juno Lucina, who brought the baby into the light. The life of a Roman woman was marked by these guardians. When a bride crossed the threshold of her new home, she greased the doorposts with wolf's fat, a very ancient animistic magic, and declared, "Where you are, Caius, I am Kaia." It was a statement of shared identity, ratified by the spirits of the house. The wedding ceremony itself was a tapestry of rituals. The bride's hair was parted with a spear point, a hasta calabaris. It had to be a spear that had been used in battle. Why? Perhaps to drive away evil spirits with the power of iron and war, or perhaps to symbolize that she was now under the protection of a new male guardian. She wore a veil of flame-colored orange, the flammium. She wore a belt tied with a knot of Hercules, which the husband would have to untie. Every step was choreographed. No one asked, "Why are we parting her hair with a spear?" It was just what was done. It was the mos. To not do it would be unlucky. Luck. Fortuna. She was perhaps the most popular deity of all. Rome was full of temples to Fortuna in all her aspects. Fortuna Redux, fortune that brings you home. Fortuna Virilis, fortune of men. Fortuna Primigenia, fortune of the firstborn. The Romans knew that despite all their planning, all their engineering, all their discipline, the world was unpredictable. A storm could sink the grain fleet. A plague could sweep through the camp. A tile could fall from a roof. Fortuna was the personification of this randomness. She was often depicted holding a rudder, steering the world, or balancing on a ball, showing her instability. They didn't try to deny luck. They tried to court her. They treated chance as a person. Be nice to me today, Fortuna. It makes the randomness of life feel less cold. If you lose your wallet, it's not just a random accident. It's Fortuna having a mood. Maybe she can be appeased. This personalized view of the universe is the key to the Roman vibe. The world is not a machine, it is a community. The wind is a person. The river is a person. The fever is a person. The luck is a person. You can talk to them. You can bargain with them. You are never staring into a cold, empty void. You are always in a crowded room, negotiating for your space. As the night deepens in our imaginary journey, we can see the lamps flickering out in the windows of the insulae. The city sleeps, but the gods do not. The Vestals are still tending the fire. The night watchmen, the vigils, are patrolling the streets, protected by their own barracks shrines. The sleeper in the bedroom has their head near the wall where the Lares live. Sleep itself was under the domain of Somnus, the god of sleep, and his son, Morpheus, the shaper of dreams. To sleep was to enter their territory. A Roman might whisper a prayer to Somnus before closing their eyes, asking for a gentle passage through the night, asking for the gate of horn rather than the gate of ivory. Even in the unconscious state, the Roman is mapped onto a spiritual geography. There is no off switch to the sacred. While the common people found comfort in the rituals of the harvest and the protective charms of the household, the educated elite of Rome often sought a different kind of spiritual shelter. For the senator, the lawyer, and the philosopher, the myths of the gods, stories of Jupiter's affairs or Mars's rages, were often seen as poetic allegories rather than literal truths. Instead, they turned to philosophy as a way of life, a form of high-minded religion that offered a fortress for the soul. Among these, Stoicism stands out as the most quintessentially Roman of all philosophies. It fit the Roman character like a well-tailored toga. It was stern, practical, and deeply concerned with duty. But for our purpose, the purpose of rest, Stoicism offers a profound tool, the discipline of the mind. Imagine the Emperor Marcus Aurelius. He is the most powerful man in the known world, yet he spends his nights in a drafty tent on the Danube frontier, fighting a never-ending war against the Germanic tribes. By the light of a single oil lamp, he writes in his journal. He is not writing laws or battle plans. He is writing to himself. These writings, which we now know as meditations, were originally titled simply To Himself. He writes about the need to retreat into the inner citadel. He tells himself that the world outside is chaotic and uncontrollable, but the world inside the mind is entirely his own. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. There is a deep, hypnotic rhythm to Stoic thought. It teaches the art of acceptance. It is the practice of aligning your will with the will of nature. If it rains, you do not get angry at the rain. You accept the rain. If the road is blocked, you do not curse the road. You find another way, or you wait. This concept, amor fati, the love of one's fate, is a technique for eliminating stress. It suggests that everything happening to you is exactly what is supposed to happen. For the Roman Stoic, the universe was governed by the Logos, a divine rational principle that permeated everything. The Logos was like a fire that shaped the world. To live in accordance with the Logos was to drift with the current of the river rather than swimming against it. It is a philosophy of ultimate relaxation, a surrendering of the ego to the great, slow movement of the cosmos. There is no need to shout, no need to panic. The Stoic sage is like a rock in the surf. The waves crash over him, but he remains unmoved. Be like the cliff against which the waves continually break, but it stands firm and tames the fury of the water around it. This imagery is incredibly soothing. It allows one to visualize themselves as solid, heavy, and enduring. On the other side of the spectrum, but equally focused on tranquility, was Epicureanism. The Epicureans are often misunderstood as seekers of luxury, but their true goal was ataraxia, untroubledness. They wanted a mind free from anxiety. They believed that the gods existed, but that they were too perfect and too far away to care about human affairs. The gods lived in the intermundia, the spaces between the worlds, in a state of eternal bliss. They did not need our sacrifices. They did not send thunderbolts. They simply existed. This removed the fear of divine punishment. If the gods don't care, you don't have to worry about offending them. You don't have to worry about hell or judgment. And regarding death, the Epicurean poet Lucretius wrote beautiful, calming verses in his great work, De Rerum Natura, on the nature of things. He explained that the world is made of atoms, seeds of things, falling through the void. When we die, our atoms simply disperse, like smoke dissolving into the air. They go on to form other things, a tree, a stream, a cloud. Death is nothing to us, he wrote. When we are, death is not. When death is, we are not. There is a chilly but peaceful comfort in this atomic materialism. It views the human being as a temporary gathering of stardust. The Epicurean garden was a place of retreat, just outside the city walls. There, friends would gather to eat simple food, bread, cheese, water, and discuss the nature of the universe. They withdrew from the noise of politics, the rat race of the forum. They cultivated a garden of the mind. Both Stoicism and Epicureanism were ways of coping with the immense pressure of living in the center of the world. They were mental technologies for generating silence, but the state required a glue to hold this vast empire together, something more tangible than philosophy. This glue was the imperial cult, the worship of the emperor. To the modern mind, the idea of worshiping a politician seems absurd. But to the Roman, it was a political necessity and a religious duty. It wasn't necessarily that they believed the man himself was a god. They worshipped his genius, his guardian spirit. They worshipped the numen, the divine power that acted through him. By offering incense to the emperor's genius, a citizen in Gaul or Egypt was pledging loyalty to the idea of Rome. It was a unifying liturgy. The process by which an emperor became a god after death is called apotheosis. It is one of the most theatrical and symbolic rituals in the Roman repertoire. Let us visualize the funeral of a beloved emperor like Antoninus Pius or Augustus. The body has been cremated or buried, but a wax effigy of the emperor is created. This wax image is treated as if it were alive. It is placed on a couch in the palace. For 7 days, doctors visit the wax figure and announce that his condition is worsening. Senators come to pay their respects. It is a performance of gradual departure. Finally, the effigy is carried in a grand procession to the Campus Martius. There, a towering structure has been built. It is a funeral pyre, but it looks like a lighthouse or a wedding cake. It has 4 tiers, each one smaller than the one below, decorated with gold cloth, ivory statues, and paintings. The wax figure is placed inside the second tier. Spices, incense, and perfumes are heaped upon the pyre, gifts from the entire empire. The amount of incense is so vast that the air is thick with the scent of cinnamon, frankincense, and myrrh. The pyre is lit. As the flames roar upwards, consuming the wood and the fabrics, a critical moment occurs. From the very top tier, an eagle is released. The bird, terrified by the fire and the smoke, flies upward into the sky. The crowd watches the bird ascend. This is the moment of apotheosis. The eagle is believed to be carrying the soul of the emperor from the mortal earth to the heavens. He is taking his place among the stars. He is no longer a man. He is now Divus, the divine Augustus, the divine Claudius. Temples are then built to this new god. A college of priests, the Sodales Augustales, is formed to tend to his worship. It is a way of civilizing death. The emperor does not die. He is promoted. The continuity of the state is preserved. The system survives the man. Speaking of temples, we must visit the one building that summarizes the entire Roman religious worldview, the Pantheon, the temple of all gods. Stand in the bustling, narrow streets of modern Rome, and you turn a corner to face it. The porch is classic. Massive granite columns, a triangular pediment. It looks like a standard Greek temple, but when you walk through the massive bronze doors, the world changes. You enter a rotunda, a perfect sphere of space. The distance from the floor to the ceiling is exactly the same as the diameter of the room. It is a sphere of air encased in concrete and brick. The most striking feature is the light. There are no windows in the walls. The only light comes from the oculus, the great eye, a circular opening in the very center of the dome, 30 feet across. The oculus is open to the sky. It is a direct connection between the temple and the heavens. As the sun moves across the sky, a spotlight of pure sunbeam moves across the interior of the Pantheon. It travels over the colored marble floor, over the statues of the gods in their niches, over the porphyry and granite. It is a celestial clock. The atmosphere inside is different from any other building. The acoustics are strange. The noise of the city is baffled, absorbed by the vast volume of air. It is a hushed, reverberant space. When it rains in Rome, it rains inside the Pantheon. The water falls through the oculus in a straight column. It hits the floor, where the marble is slightly curved to drain the water away. To stand inside and watch the rain fall in a quiet, vertical shaft, surrounded by dry grandeur, is a hypnotic experience. It brings the weather inside. It brings the mood of the sky into the house of the gods. The Pantheon was designed to make the visitor feel small, but not crushed. You feel held by the geometry. The circle, the sphere, has no beginning and no end. It represents the perfection of the cosmos. Standing there, looking up at the passing clouds framed by the concrete ring, you understand the Roman ambition to build a universe of their own, mirroring the universe above. This architectural mastery was another form of worship. The Romans worshipped with stone and concrete. They praised the gods by building roads that didn't curve, aqueducts that didn't leak, and domes that didn't fall. Perfection of craft was a form of prayer. We should also consider the fetiales, a specific college of priests whose job was strictly international relations. They were the priests of diplomacy. Rome prided itself on fighting just wars. They couldn't just attack someone because they wanted their land. They needed a casus belli, a religious justification. When a dispute arose with a neighbor, the fetiales were sent to the border. One priest, the pater patratus, would wear a woolen fillet around his head. He would stand at the border and call upon Jupiter to witness that the Roman demands were just. Hear, O Jupiter, hear ye boundaries of this nation. I am the public messenger of the Roman people. Justly and religiously do I come, and let my words be credited. He would repeat his demands. If, after 33 days, there was no satisfaction, he would return to the border carrying a spear. But this was a special spear, a spear made of cornel wood with a point of iron or fire-hardened wood, dipped in blood. He would declare war and throw the spear across the boundary into the enemy territory. This act, the throwing of the spear, legally and religiously, opened the hostility. Later, as the empire grew so large that the borders were weeks of travel away, this ritual became inconvenient. They couldn't send a priest to the border of Parthia every time. So, with typical Roman ingenuity, they adapted. They designated a small plot of ground near the Temple of Bellona in Rome as enemy territory. When they needed to declare war on a distant nation, a prisoner of war from that nation was forced to buy a piece of land there. Then, the priest would throw the spear into that little patch of dirt in Rome. The ritual was satisfied. The gods were appeased. The legal paperwork was done. This story highlights the intense legalism of Roman religion. It was a system of loopholes and technicalities, but it also shows their desperate need to feel right. They needed to believe that the universe was on their side, that they were the good guys following the rules. As the sun sets on the empire, the shadows in the temples grow longer. The smoke from the sacrifices drifts through the marble columns. The old gods, the indigitamenta, the spirits of the door hinge, and the wheat rust begin to feel distant. The philosophical schools offer comfort to the few, but the masses are hungry for something else. They are hungry for a victory over death that is more personal than the atomic dissolution of the Epicureans. They are looking for a God who loves them, not just a God who trades favors for burnt ox meat. As the centuries wore on, the sprawling, chaotic crowdedness of the Roman pantheon began to feel overwhelming to some. The sheer number of gods, spirits, and demons required to keep the empire safe was exhausting. In times of crisis, when the borders were crumbling and the currency was collapsing, the Roman mind began to yearn for simplicity. They began to look for a single, unifying source of power, a single light to banish the growing shadows. This desire manifested in the rise of solar monotheism, the worship of the sun, Sol Invictus, the unconquered sun. It is a natural evolution. If the emperor is the single ruler of the earth, surely there must be a single ruler of the heavens. The sun is the most obvious candidate. It is undeniable. It is consistent. It gives life to everything. It drives away the terror of the dark. The Emperor Aurelian, a soldier emperor who pulled the empire back from the brink of collapse, built a magnificent temple to Sol Invictus in the Campus Martius. Imagine standing before it. It was a structure of blinding white marble designed to catch and amplify the light. Inside, gold vessels reflected the rays. It was a religion of brightness, of clarity, of victory. The festival of Sol Invictus was celebrated on December 25th, the Dies Natalis Solis Invicti, the birthday of the unconquered sun. This was the winter solstice, the shortest day of the year. It was the turning point. From this day forward, the days would get longer. The sun had defeated the night. It was a celebration of the return of the light, a promise that the cold would not last forever. For the weary citizen of the late empire, this worship offered a streamlined, focused spirituality. You didn't need to remember the names of 100 minor deities. You just had to look up. The god was right there, warm on your face. But beneath the bright glare of the official solar cult, another quiet revolution was taking place. It was happening in the shadows, in the back rooms of workshops, and in the tunnels beneath the city. Christianity was spreading, not with the crash of thunder, but like a slow, rising tide. To the traditional Roman, these Christians were baffling. They were often called atheists because they refused to worship the gods of the state. They refused to offer the pinch of incense to the emperor's genius. They stepped out of the Pax Deorum. They were a gap in the shield. Yet, if we look at the early Christian communities through the lens of quietness, we find a different kind of peace. They called their burial places coemateria. This is a Greek word that means sleeping places. It is the origin of our word cemetery. Before this, the Romans spoke of necropolis, cities of the dead. But the Christians spoke of dormitories. To them, death was merely a sleep, a temporary rest before the awakening. This change in language reflects a profound shift in the psychology of death. It removed the finality. It removed the terror. Let us descend into the catacombs of Rome. There are miles of these tunnels dug into the soft volcanic tufa rock outside the city walls. They are cool, silent, and smell of damp earth. The air is still. Walking through them, carrying a small clay lamp, you pass thousands of niches carved into the walls. These are not places of horror. They are archives of hope. The inscriptions on the marble slabs sealing the graves are simple. They do not list the honors and offices of the deceased like the pagan tombs. They simply say, "In peace, in pace," or "He sleeps, dormant." The symbols carved next to the names are gentle, pastoral images: a dove with an olive branch, an anchor symbolizing safety in the storm, a fish, and most commonly, the Good Shepherd, a young man carrying a sheep on his shoulders. This image of the shepherd resonates deeply with the desire for rest. It suggests that the soul does not have to navigate the terrifying underworld alone. It is carried, it is held. It is a religion of being found. In the city above, the Christians met in domus ecclesiae, house churches. These were ordinary homes. There were no grand temples yet. They would gather in a dining room, reclining around a table. They shared a meal called the ape, the love feast. It was a communal dinner, quiet and intimate. They broke bread. They shared wine. They read letters from distant teachers. Compared to the bloody sacrifices of the forum, with the bellowing oxen and the smoke, this simple meal must have felt incredibly peaceful. It was domestic. It was orderly. It was centered on a message of caritas, charity, care, love. But this quietness was seen as a threat. The Roman state, obsessed with unity, could not tolerate a group that opted out of the system. The persecution of the Christians was not just about religious intolerance. It was a bureaucratic attempt to enforce conformity. It was a clash between two different ideas of peace: the Pax Romana, enforced by legions and laws, and the Pax Christi, an internal peace that claimed to transcend the world. The great persecution under Emperor Diocletian was the final desperate attempt of the old gods to stamp out the new faith. Diocletian was a man of systems. He loved order. He reorganized the army, the currency, the provinces, and the taxes. He tried to fix the prices of every good in the market. He wanted the empire to run like a clock. He viewed the Christians as a broken gear in his machine. He issued edicts: tear down the meeting places, burn the books, deprive them of status. But the result was unexpected. The Christians did not fight back with swords. They fought back with a terrifying, stubborn stillness. When arrested, many simply stood there. They refused to argue. They refused to curse the emperor. They simply said, "I am a Christian." This passivity was confusing to the Roman magistrates. They were used to people begging, bribing, or fighting. To face someone who was calm in the face of death was unnerving. It suggested that these people had access to a resource that the Romans did not understand, a reservoir of inner quiet that the state could not drain. There is a story of St. Lawrence, a deacon in Rome. When the prefect demanded the treasures of the church, Lawrence asked for 3 days to gather them. He spent those days rounding up the poor, the crippled, the blind, and the suffering people supported by the church's charity. On the 3rd day, he presented this crowd to the prefect and said, "Here are the treasures of the church." It was a subversion of Roman values. Rome valued gold, strength, and victory. Lawrence presented weakness and poverty as holy. It was a turning of the world upside down. As the persecution failed, the mood of the empire shifted. The old gods were tired. The temples were becoming museums. The oracles fell silent. The famous Oracle of Delphi, which had spoken for 1,000 years, is said to have sent a final message to the Emperor Julian. "Tell the king, the fair-wrought house has fallen. No shelter has Apollo, nor the sacred laurel leaves. The fountains are now silent. The voice is stilled. It is a poignant image. The gods packing up and leaving. The magic draining out of the springs and the groves. The silence of the oracle is the silence of an era ending. And then the bridge, the Milvian Bridge. The year is 312 AD. The Emperor Constantine is marching on Rome to fight his rival, Maxentius. It is a civil war. Constantine is anxious. The night before the battle, he has a vision. Some say he saw a cross of light in the sky above the sun, with the words, "In hoc signo vinces." In this sign, you will conquer. Others say he had a dream where he was told to paint the Chi Rho, a monogram of Christ's name, on the shields of his soldiers. Whatever happened in the quiet of that tent, the next morning, the Roman legions marched out with a new symbol. They were fighting under the banner of the Galilean carpenter. Constantine won the battle. Maxentius drowned in the Tiber. Constantine entered Rome not just as a conqueror, but as the herald of a new age. The Edict of Milan followed, granting religious toleration. The persecution stopped. The catacombs were opened. The bishops came out of the shadows. This transition was not instant. Rome remained a pagan city for a long time. The Senate still burnt incense to victory. The Vestals still tended the fire. But the momentum had shifted. Constantine began to build, and he built big. He didn't build in the center of Rome, which was crowded with pagan temples. He built on the outskirts, over the graves of the martyrs. He built St. Peter's Basilica on the Vatican Hill, over a humble cemetery. He built St. John Lateran. These new churches were not like the pagan temples. The pagan temple was a house for the god, small and dark, with the people outside. The Christian basilica was a meeting hall, a royal court, designed to hold thousands of people inside. Imagine entering the old St. Peter's. It was a vast, barn-like structure with timber roofs and forest of columns. It was filled with light from the clerestory windows. The air smelled of beeswax candles and incense, not the frankincense of the pagan sacrifice, but the sweet incense of the church. The soundscape changed too. Instead of the mumble of the priest and the flute player, there was chanting. The psalms, antiphonal singing, where one side of the choir answers the other. A slow, rhythmic wave of sound washing back and forth across the nave. Kyrie eleison, Lord, have mercy, a Greek phrase that became a staple of the Latin Mass, a repetitive, hypnotic plea for peace and forgiveness. The city of Rome was slowly being remapped. The sacred geography was changing. The old centers of power, the Capitol, the Palatine, were losing their potency. The new centers were the shrines of the saints on the periphery. The pilgrims began to arrive. They didn't come to see the Forum. They came to touch the bones of Peter and Paul. This cult of the saints introduced a new kind of boring ritual, the vigil. The faithful would spend the entire night in the church, waiting for a feast day. They would sit in the semi-darkness, praying, dozing, listening to readings. It was a collective act of waiting, a sanctification of the passage of time. The saints themselves became the new indigitamenta. Instead of a god for the door hinge, you had a patron saint for travelers. Instead of a god for fever, you had a saint for healing. The structure remained, but the names changed. The human need for a specific, functional spiritual assistant was too strong to disappear. It just put on new clothes. But even as Christianity triumphed, the empire itself was changing. The capital moved to Constantinople. Rome was left behind. It became an old city, a city of memory. The population shrank. The great baths began to close as the aqueducts were cut or fell into disrepair. There is a profound melancholy in the decline of Rome, a slow, quiet crumbling. The grass began to grow in the Forum. The marble was stripped from the temples to burn for lime or to build churches. The statues were toppled or buried. Yet, in this decay, there was a new kind of peace. The peace of the ruin. The frantic energy of the capital of the world was gone. Rome became a garden of broken stone. The cowherds grazed their cattle in the Forum Romanum, which came to be known as the Campo Vaccino, the cow field. Imagine the silence of that scene. A cow chewing cud in the shadow of the arch of Septimius Severus. A shepherd resting against a fallen Corinthian column. The shouts of the senators and the tramp of the legions replaced by the lowing of cattle and the buzzing of insects. It is the ultimate victory of nature over history. The stone returns to the earth. The hubris of empire softens into a romantic landscape. In this twilight of the city, a new figure emerged as the guardian of order, the Pope. As the emperors faded, the Bishop of Rome stepped into the vacuum. He took on the title Pontifex Maximus, the title of the high priest of the old religion. He took on the red shoes of the Roman aristocrat. The church inherited the administrative genius of Rome. It organized the world into dioceses. It created a canon law. It maintained the Latin language. It kept the records. In the monasteries, the monks began their work of copying. The scriptorium of a monastery is perhaps the most peaceful workspace ever invented. A room of silent men, bending over parchment, scratching with quill pens. They were preserving the light of civilization in a darkening world. They copied the Bible, yes, but they also copied Virgil, Ovid, and Cicero. We owe our knowledge of the Roman world to these silent copyists. Their work was slow, repetitive, and incredibly boring, just copying letter after letter, line after line. Grind, grind goes the mind, but the hand moves with grace. They illuminated the letters with gold and blue, turning text into art. This transition from the sword to the pen, from the legion to the order of monks, marks the end of our journey through the active religious life of Rome and the beginning of the medieval contemplation. But before we close the book on the ancient gods, we must look at how they persisted in the folklore, in the superstitions, and in the very days of the week. Mars, the god of war, gave us Martis dies, Tuesday in Romance languages. Mercury gave us Mercurii dies, Wednesday. Jove gave us Jovis dies, Thursday. Venus gave us Veneris dies, Friday. Saturn gave us Saturday. The sun gave us Sunday. The moon gave us Monday. Every time we look at a calendar, we are unconsciously reciting the roll call of the Roman pantheon. They are still with us, hidden in the structure of our time, quietly governing the rhythm of our weeks. As the sun sets over the ruins of the Palatine, casting long purple shadows across the cow pastures of the Forum, we can feel the presence of all the layers we have explored. The archaic spirits of the soil, the civic gods of the Republic, the emotional saviors of the mystery cults, and the saints of the basilicas. They all settle down together in the dust of history. It is a crowded, complex, but ultimately unified story of human beings trying to find a way to live with the unknown, trying to find a way to sleep soundly at night, knowing that something, somewhere, is watching over the house. As the great fire of the state religion flickered and dimmed, a different kind of quiet settled over the city. But to truly understand the depth of this silence, we must witness the moment the heartbeat of ancient Rome finally stopped. The year is 394 AD. The Emperor Theodosius has defeated the usurper Eugenius at the Battle of the Frigidus. It is the final victory of Christianity over the old pagan aristocracy. Theodosius issues a decree. The eternal fire of Vesta must be extinguished. The order is absolute. The College of the Vestal Virgins is disbanded. Imagine standing in the Atrium Vestae on that final day. For over 1,000 years, continuously, without a single break, the fire had burned. It had seen the Gauls sack Rome. It had seen the Republic become an empire. It had seen the Colosseum rise. It was the oldest living thing in the city. The last chief Vestal, Caelia Concordia, stands before the hearth. She is an old woman, her life defined entirely by this flame. She does not pour water on it. That would be violent. Instead, she simply stops feeding it. We watch as the flames consume the last log. The orange glow softens to a dull red. The crackling sound, which has been the background noise of the forum for a millennium, fades into a whisper. The red embers turn to gray ash. A thin wisp of smoke rises straight up in the still air and then vanishes. The hearth is cold. The temple is silent. It is a profound, shocking emptiness. It is like the sudden stopping of a clock in a quiet room. The citizens walking past the circular temple feel a strange chill. The guardian spirit has left the building. The door is locked. The luck of Rome is now no longer bound to a physical fire, but to a spiritual idea. But religions do not die as easily as fires. They linger, they hide, they retreat into the landscape. This brings us to the origin of the word pagan. It comes from the Latin paganus, which simply means villager or country dweller. As the cities became Christian, the old gods fled to the countryside. They took refuge in the woods, the springs, and the farms. The farmer, far from the eyes of the bishop, continued to do what his grandfather had done. He might go to church on Sunday, but on Monday he still poured a little milk on the boundary stone. He still left a small cake for the nymphs at the spring. This rural religion was stubborn because it was useful. It was tied to the rhythm of the soil. The Christian church, in its wisdom, realized that it could not simply ban these rituals. It had to absorb them. It had to rename them. We see this beautifully in the transformation of the Ambarvalia, the festival of walking the boundaries of the fields. The church created the rogation days. The priest would lead the villagers in a procession around the parish boundaries. They carried a cross instead of a pig. They chanted litanies instead of hymns to Mars. But the action was exactly the same. They were walking the line. They were beating the bounds. They were asking for protection for the crops. The rhythm of the feet on the earth remained unchanged. Even the bees were baptized. The Romans believed that bees were special, divine creatures. They were models of a perfect, orderly society. In the Christian countryside, the blessing of the bees became a solemn ritual. The priest would go to the hives and whisper a prayer, asking for an abundance of honey and wax. Beeswax was essential for the church candles. The smell of the church became the smell of the hive. This continuity offers a deep sense of comfort. It suggests that the fundamental relationship between humans and nature is unbreakable. Regimes change, names change, but the need to bless the bees and walk the fields remains. In this era of transition, people also sought comfort in small, tangible objects. The uncertainty of the times led to a boom in the use of magical gems and amulets. These are the intaglios, gemstones carved with intricate images. Imagine holding one of these gems in your hand. It is small, smooth, and cool to the touch. It might be a piece of red carnelian, green jasper, or dark hematite. On it, a tiny image is carved: a lion with a sunray halo, a snake with a rooster's head, or simply a word. These were the Gnostic gems or Abraxas stones. They often featured nonsense words or long strings of vowels. A-I-O-U, Oya, A-E-O. These were voces magici, magical voices. They were not meant to be understood. They were meant to be vibrated. To hum these vowel sounds was a form of meditation, a way to align the breath with the cosmos. People would rub these stones with their thumbs when they were anxious. Grind, grind goes the worry, but the stone remains smooth. Carrying a piece of jasper, engraved with a medical prescription, was believed to cure stomach aches. It was a placebo, yes, but a placebo that you could hold. It was a touchstone for tranquility. The late Roman mind was also obsessed with the macrocosm, the big picture. As the empire on earth crumbled, they looked to the empire of the stars. The philosopher Macrobius wrote a commentary that became the standard textbook on the structure of the universe for the next 1,000 years. He described the music of the spheres. This is one of the most beautiful and sleep-inducing concepts in history. The idea is that the planets, as they revolve in their crystal spheres around the Earth, emit a tone. The moon hums a low note, Mercury a bit higher, Venus higher still, all the way up to the fixed stars. Together, they create a perfect, eternal harmony, a cosmic chord that never ends. We cannot hear it, Macrobius explains, only because we have heard it since the moment of our birth. It is the background hum of existence. It is silence to us, but it is actually music. Imagine lying in bed in a Roman villa, looking out the window at the night sky. You visualize the heavy sphere of Saturn moving slowly, deep and bass. You visualize the quick, bright note of Jupiter. You realize that the silence of the night is actually a symphony. It is a deeply settling thought. You are resting inside a giant musical instrument. This turn towards the internal and the celestial coincided with the rise of a new kind of living space, the monastery. The early monks were the athletes of God, but they were also the architects of silence. The design of the monastery cloister is a masterpiece of mood regulation. It is a square garden surrounded by a covered walkway. The center is open to the sky. It is an hortus conclusus, an enclosed garden. The walls are high. You cannot see the outside world. You can only see the garden and the sky. This forces the attention inward and upward. In the center of the garden, there is always a fountain or a well. Water again. The sound of the water is the only sound allowed to compete with the chanting of the offices. The monks developed a strict schedule of time, the horarium, matins, lauds, prime, terce, sext, nones, vespers, compline. The day was sliced into sacred segments. Every 3 hours, a bell would ring. This is a crucial sonic shift. The Roman day was fluid, marked by the position of the sun. The Christian day was digital, marked by the mechanical tolling of the bell. The bell became the voice of God in the community. But before the great bells of the medieval cathedrals, there were the smaller handbells of the wandering saints. In Ireland and Britain, the Celtic saints carried iron bells. These were not cast in molds, but folded from sheets of metal and riveted like cowbells. They made a clanking, dull sound. The sound of these bells drifting across a foggy moor or a lonely valley was a signal of safety. It meant a holy man was nearby. It meant prayer was happening. The saint's bell was often kept in a shrine even after the saint died. It was used to cure headaches or to swear oaths upon. Let us return to Rome one last time to look at the physical transformation of the temples. What happens to a house of a god when the god is evicted? Some were destroyed, their columns pulled down to build walls, but many were purified and repurposed. This process was surprisingly gentle in many cases. The Pantheon, which we visited earlier, was saved because it was turned into the Church of St. Mary and the Martyrs. They carted away the statues of Jupiter and Mars. They scrubbed the altars, but they kept the floor. They kept the dome. They kept the light. The building itself was considered too noble to destroy. This act of preservation means that when you walk into the Pantheon today, you are walking on the same stones that Hadrian walked on. You are seeing the same light. The silence has been preserved, canning the atmosphere of the 2nd century and keeping it fresh for the 21st. There is a church in Rome called San Clemente. It is a layer cake of history. On the street level, you have a 12th century church. Go down a staircase, and you are in a 4th century church. Go down further, into the damp dark, and you are in a 1st century Roman house. And in the courtyard of that house, there is a Mithraeum. You can stand in the darkness of the Mithraeum, hear the underground river rushing beneath the floor, and feel the weight of the churches above you. It is a physical sensation of time pressing down. It is comforting in its heaviness. It reminds us that the present is just a thin layer of paint on top of a very deep mountain of past. The transition from Roman to medieval was also a transition in the sense of smell. The smell of the ancient city was garlic, garum, fish sauce, wood smoke, and burnt animal fat. The smell of the new Christian city was beeswax and incense. The production of beeswax became a major industry. The church needed pure wax for the candles on the altar. The candle was a symbol of the light of Christ, but it was also a very practical technology of comfort. A beeswax candle burns cleanly. It gives off a sweet, honeyed scent. It produces a warm, golden light. To sit in a dark stone basilica, lit only by 100 beeswax candles, is to experience a very specific kind of hypnosis. The flames flicker, the shadows dance. The gold mosaics on the ceiling catch the light and shimmer. It creates a liminal space, a threshold state between waking and sleeping. This is the atmosphere of the Dark Ages. It wasn't dark in a scary sense. It was dim. It was the cozy, fire-lit dimness of a world that had shrunk back to a more manageable size. The grand, bright, exposed forums were gone. The life of the mind retreated into the study, the cell, the chapel. As the political borders of Rome dissolved, the Latin language became a sacred fortress. It ceased to be the language of the street and became the language of the ritual. This had a profound effect. When a language is no longer used for arguing over the price of fish, it becomes frozen. It becomes timeless. The sound of Latin chanting, Pater Noster, quies in caelis, became a vibration of power. The peasants didn't need to understand the grammar to feel the weight of the words. The very incomprehensibility of the language added to its mystery and its soothing power. It was the language of angels, of saints, of the past. It was a bridge to the eternal. And so, the boring history of Rome doesn't end with a bang. It ends with a whisper. It ends with a monk dipping his pen into an inkwell. It ends with a farmer making the sign of the cross over a loaf of bread. It ends with the slow, steady transformation of marble gods into stone saints. As the Middle Ages deepened, the city of Rome did not disappear. It merely fell into a deep, enchanted sleep. The noise of the imperial administration was replaced by the shuffling feet of pilgrims. They came from the foggy north, from England, from France, walking for months to reach the threshold of the apostles. To them, the ruined city was not a historical site, but a landscape of miracles and giants. They carried with them small handwritten guidebooks called the Mirabilia Urbis Romae. The Wonders of the City of Rome. These books are fascinating because they show us how the memory of the ancient religion had been softened and transformed into fairy tales. The pilgrims looked at the massive ruins and could not believe that ordinary men had built them. They believed they were the work of magic. They looked at the Colosseum, now overgrown with ivy and home to bandits and wolves, and they whispered that it had once been a temple of the sun. They believed that a giant bronze statue of the sun god once stood in the center, holding a sphere that represented the world. They imagined that this temple was covered in a dome of gilded bronze that moved with the stars, creating artificial rain and thunder. It wasn't true, of course, but it was a beautiful dream. It turned a place of slaughter into a place of celestial mechanics. They looked at the equestrian statue of Marcus Aurelius on the Capitoline Hill. We know it is the philosopher-emperor extending his hand in a gesture of peace. But the medieval pilgrims believed it was Constantine, the first Christian emperor. Because of this mistaken identity, the statue was saved from the melting pot. It stood there, a lone bronze rider watching over the shrinking city. There was a legend that the horse was slowly turning gold. It was said that the gold plating, which had mostly worn off, was growing back speck by speck. When the horse became entirely gold again, the end of the world would come. It is a slow, apocalyptic clock, a statue quietly ticking towards Judgment Day, one flake of gold at a time. This reimagining of the city was a way of making the alien ruins feel familiar. The ancient statues of river gods, reclining with their urns, were renamed. They became images of the Jordan River, or simply the Marforio, a talking statue that citizens would paste notes onto. The gods didn't leave, they just became local characters. In this era, the very fabric of the city was being reshuffled. This is the age of spolia. The word means spoils or booty. Builders would take columns, capitals, and friezes from abandoned Roman temples and use them to build new churches. Walk into the church of Santa Maria in Trastevere. The columns lining the nave are not matching. They are a hodgepodge of different marbles: granite, cipollino, porphyry. Some have Ionic capitals, some Corinthian. Some are slightly taller than others and have to be propped up. These are the bones of ancient temples, reassembled into a new skeleton. There is something deeply peaceful about this recycling. It suggests that nothing is ever truly wasted. The stone that once heard the prayers to Jupiter now hears the Gregorian chant. The physical material remains. Only the intent changes. Sometimes you can see pieces of Roman inscriptions built into a medieval wall, but placed upside down or sideways. A piece of a tombstone becomes a door lintel. A dedication to a pagan god becomes a floor tile. The text is fragmented, the meaning lost, but the marble is still cool and solid. It is a literal deconstruction of the past. The words of the ancestors are reduced to texture. But not all marble was saved. Much of it was fed into the lime kilns. This was the quiet, destructive industry of the Middle Ages. To make mortar for new buildings, they needed lime. To get lime, they burned marble. Imagine the scene at the Forum in the 7th or 8th century. A kiln has been built inside the Basilica Julia. It is a round brick oven. The lime burners are slowly feeding pieces of a statue or a column into the fire. They are cooking history. The fire burns for days, a slow, intense heat that turns the hard stone into soft white powder. It sounds tragic to us, but there is a rhythmic inevitability to it. Stone to dust, dust to stone. The white lime mortar holding the stones of a medieval tower. is actually the ghost of a Roman temple. The city is literally built out of itself. It is a cannibal city, digesting its own past to stay alive. Despite this physical decay, the intellectual legacy of Rome found a safe harbor. We mentioned the monasteries, but let us look specifically at the library of Cassiodorus. He was a Roman statesman who saw the end coming. He retired to his family estate in the south of Italy at Vivarium and founded a monastery with a specific purpose: to save the books. He told his monks that copying manuscripts was a form of prayer. Every letter written is a wound on Satan's body, he said, but it was also a way of calming the mind. He established a system of lamps that would self-trim their wicks so the monks could work through the night without interruption. Imagine the scriptorium at Vivarium. It is a factory of silence. The only sounds are the scratch of the quill, the turning of a page, and the soft sputtering of the mechanical lamps. They copied treatises on grammar, on spelling, on music, on astronomy. They didn't judge the content. They just preserved it. They built an ark of parchment to float over the flood of the Dark Ages. Because of them, we still have the works of the Roman agronomists Columella and Varro, who wrote about farming. We still know how the Romans kept bees, how they grafted apple trees, how they cured ham. The practical, boring knowledge of the earth survived because a monk in the 6th century thought it was worth copying. And along with the books, the stars remained. The Roman names for the constellations were so deeply embedded in the culture that the church couldn't dislodge them. Look up at the night sky: the Great Bear, Ursa Major; the Hunter, Orion; the twins, Gemini. These are Roman and Greek stories pinned to the sky. The church tried to rename them. They tried to call the 12 signs of the zodiac the 12 apostles. They tried to call the sun Christ and the moon Mary, but it didn't stick. The farmers needed the old signs. They knew that when the Pleiades rose, it was time to harvest. When Sirius, the dog star, was high, it was the hot dog days of summer. The sky was a functional calendar, and you don't change the operating system of a farm just because the state religion has changed. So, the pagan gods survived in the safest place of all, the stars. Every night, the Roman pantheon wheeled overhead, silent and untouched by the lime kilns or the popes. Venus still shone in the evening. Jupiter still ruled the midnight sky. This survival of the old ways and the daily habits of the people is known as folklore. In the medieval Italian countryside, the belief in the strega, the witch, was strong. But these witches were often just the inheritors of the old herbal knowledge. They knew which plants to pick by moonlight. They knew the susurrus, the whispering charms. They used rue, fennel, and garlic. They called upon spirits that sounded suspiciously like the old Diana, the goddess of the hunt and the moon. In the city of Rome, the popes eventually began to collect the ancient statues instead of destroying them. In the Renaissance, they created the Belvedere courtyard in the Vatican. There, they placed the Laocoon, the Apollo Belvedere, the torso. This was a turning point. The statues were no longer idols to be feared. They were art to be admired. They were neutralized. They were put on pedestals. The fear evaporated, leaving only beauty. But let us step back into the quiet of the medieval transition one last time. There is a specific quality to the light in a ruined building. When the roof of a bathhouse collapses, the sunlight floods into the frigidarium. Vines begin to grow down the walls. The mosaic floor, once scrubbed clean by slaves, is covered in a soft carpet of moss. This is the picturesque. It is the aesthetic of rest. A ruin is a building that has stopped working. It has no more function. It is just being. It is slowly returning to the earth. To sit in a Roman ruin, watching a lizard sun itself on a broken piece of marble, is to experience a deep, geological calm. The urgency of the empire is gone. The deadline is past. The legion has marched away. All that is left is the stone, the sun, and the silence. We can imagine a medieval hermit taking up residence in the arches of the Colosseum. He builds a small wooden shack against the massive travertine piers. He plants a small garden in the arena where gladiators once fought. He keeps a few chickens. He prays. For him, the Colosseum is not a monument to cruelty. It is just a quarry, a shelter, a part of the landscape. He lives in the skeleton of the whale. He is completely at peace in the belly of the beast. This image of the hermit in the ruins is the perfect symbol for our journey. It is the human spirit finding a quiet corner in the wreckage of history. It is the ability to sleep soundly, even when surrounded by the ghosts of giants. As we prepare to close our eyes on this long history, we must acknowledge the greatest invention of the Roman religious mind, the concept of otium. Otium is often translated as leisure, but that is too active. Otium is the opposite of negotium, business. Negotium is the negation of otium. Therefore, otium is the natural state of man. It is the time spent on reading, thinking, gardening, and resting. It is the time when the soul grows. The Romans worked hard so that they could enjoy otium. They conquered the world so they could retire to a villa and count their grapes. In the end, the religion, the rituals, the sacrifices, they were all a technology to ensure the safety and stability that makes otium possible. They wanted a boring life, a life where the barbarians stay on their side of the river, where the wheat grows on schedule, and where the gods are polite and predictable. And so, we arrive at the end of our long patrol. We have walked the sacred boundaries of the fields, stood in the smoke of the great sacrifices, whispered with the Vestals, and marched with the legions. We have seen the gods of the cupboard and the gods of the stars. We have watched the fires burn, and we have watched them go out. Now it is time for the final ritual. It is time for the lustratio of the mind. In the ancient world, when a ceremony was finished, when the procession was over, the priest would declare, "Illicet, it is permitted to go. The obligation has been fulfilled. The contract is complete. You are free to leave the temple and return to your rest. Let us mentally perform this closing rite." Imagine we are walking back through the city we have explored. The sun has fully set now. The sky is a deep, velvety purple, speckled with the hard, bright diamonds of the constellations. The 7 hills of Rome are just dark silhouettes against the stars. We walk past the Forum. It is empty. The political arguments are over. The legal cases are closed. The rostrum, where the orators shouted, is silent. The wind blows softly through the columns of the Temple of Saturn, making a low, hollow sound. It is the sound of peace. The state is asleep. We walk past the Temple of Vesta. The fire is out, but the stone is still warm. The circular shape of the temple reminds us of the cycle of the day. We started in the morning, and now we have come full circle to the night. There is no anxiety in this darkness, only the comfort of a job well done. We walk out of the city gates, past the pyramid of Cestius, past the tombs on the Appian Way. The spirits of the ancestors, the Manes, are at rest. We do not need to spit beans for them tonight. They are content. They are the quiet soil beneath our feet. We walk into the fields. The oxen are unyoked and sleeping in the barn. The plow is put away. The boundary stones, the termini, stand guard in the moonlight. They are the silent sentinels of order. They hold the world in place so that we don't have to. The wheat grows silently in the dark, fed by the dew. The indigitamenta, the little gods of the roots and the seeds, are doing their work. We can leave them to it. We return, finally, to the Roman house. We cross the threshold, leading with the right foot, one last time. We lock the heavy wooden door. The noise of the world is shut out. Inside, the atrium is dimly lit by a single oil lamp. The flame is small and steady. It casts a warm orange circle of light. The shadows flicker gently on the painted walls. The air smells faintly of lavender and old wood. We go to the lararium, the household shrine. The little bronze figures of the lares are there. They are dancing their eternal silent dance. We look at them, and they look back. There is no need for a prayer tonight. No need for incense or wine. A nod is enough. They know. They are the guardians of the night watch. We move to the bedroom, the cubiculum. It is small and simple. A bed, a blanket, a window looking out at the garden. In the garden, the fountain is trickling. Burble, splash. It is the only sound. It is the sound of the aqueducts, the lifeblood of Rome, flowing without effort. As you lay down, remember the concept of otium. You have earned this. The Romans conquered the Mediterranean so that a citizen could lie in bed and feel safe. You are the inheritor of that safety. The legions are guarding the frontier so you don't have to. The engineers have built the walls so you don't have to. The priests have negotiated with the gods so you don't have to. You are entering the inner citadel that Marcus Aurelius wrote about. The walls of your mind are thick. The chaos of the outside world cannot get in. Inside, there is only the logos, the rational, calm order of the universe. Feel the gravity. The Romans loved weight. They loved heavy stone, heavy gold, heavy duty. Let that heaviness settle on you now. Let your limbs feel like marble, not cold, but solid, permanent, grounded. You are a statue in a quiet grotto. The weather may change outside, the seasons may turn, but you remain still. Think of the music of the spheres, the great, slow rotation of the planets, Saturn, Jupiter, Mars, Venus, Mercury, the moon. They are turning above you right now. A giant, cosmic clockwork mechanism. It is precise. It is flawless. It hums with a vibration too low to hear, a vibration that resonates with the slow beating of your own heart. There is a Latin phrase often found on tombstones, but we will repurpose it for the living sleeper. Sit tibi terra levis. May the earth rest lightly on you. Usually it is a wish for the dead, but tonight let it be a wish for the living. May the physical world rest lightly on you. May the blanket be light. May the gravity be gentle. May the concerns of the day evaporate like the morning mist. The history we have discussed is not a burden. It is a cushion. It is a deep, soft layer of time. You are resting on top of thousands of years of human experience. Millions of people have lived, worked, prayed, and slept under this same sky. They have all found their rest. You are part of that great, long line. The gods of Rome are quiet now. Jupiter has laid down his thunderbolt. Mars has hung up his shield. Minerva has closed her book. The doors of the temple of Janus are shut. There is peace in the heavens and peace on earth. The Vestal Virgin has banked the fire. The embers are glowing under the ash, keeping the heat for tomorrow. But for now, the flame sleeps. The augur has put down his staff. He is no longer watching the sky for birds. The sky is empty. The omens are good. The sign is silence. The farmer has finished the harvest. The grain is in the bin. The season is over. The cycle is complete. The city of Rome, the eternal city, drifts into the dream time. The marble turns blue in the moonlight. The Tiber flows black and smooth to the sea. Everything is in its place. Pax Deorum, the peace of the gods. You are safe. You are guarded. You are free to let go. Thank you for traveling back with me tonight to the world of the Roman spirits. I hope the order and the ritual of their lives has brought some order and ritual to your rest. If you are still awake, you can let the playlist continue to the next video. If you are asleep, then bene dormias. Sleep well. Good night. If this journey through the duller side of history helped you unwind and maybe even drift off, please let me know. First, hit that like button if you enjoyed this historical lullaby. Second, subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future installments of history too boring to keep you awake. Finally, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below about which historical topic you find so mundane. It deserves to be our next sleepy video. Your suggestions will shape our journey into the world's most delightfully dull past.